Cool. All right. Well, let's get started. One thing I'm obligated to tell you is that we are recording this meeting. And we have two amazing talks today. The first one is from Brex, who's going to share about their journey with Amundsen and what they're doing to add Looker integration to Amundsen. And then the second talk is from REA Group, where they're going to talk about their journey with data cataloging and Amundsen. And they are all waking up. They're all in Australia, the REA Group folks, and it's 4 a.m. their time. So we really appreciate them waking up early and joining us today. So we're going to pass it on to Joe, who's going to talk about Amundsen at Brex.
Hello. Let me just share my screen. Here we go. And present. Okay, great. Can you all see it?
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so hi, my name is Joe. I am a data engineer on the data platform team at Brex. And yes, I'm going to tell you all about how we have started using Amundsen. So I'm just going to start with why did we choose Amundsen, and why data catalog at all. And so I'll talk about some of the problems that we faced at Brex up until recently, and still as we implement this. Data scientists and analysts found it pretty difficult to figure out what was in a table, how it's used, where it's used, what each column means. And often that documentation didn't exist at all. So what they found themselves doing was tapping somebody on the shoulder, I guess virtually now, and asking them, hey, what's in this table? Not very efficient. The other problem that we have is that we don't really have like a unified way to tag and add metadata to tables. And this can be useful for sensitive data in PII. We do have things like this in place where they're needed, but they're quite local. What we want is something kind of unified and global. And of course, the data catalog is the perfect fit for all of these problems. It can give us a single searchable source of documentation. The data catalog can display dependencies between tables and dashboards. And I think what we hope is that its mere existence will provide motivation for people to write better documentation, and also actually allow us to figure out which tables are popular, which are also undocumented. Go and ask those people to write some docs. And then all the data catalogs that we looked at provide some kind of tagging, which can be integrated with automated tools as well as manual. And so then why Amundsen? Well, we did look at a vendor, but we really decided that the advantages of open source were too hard to ignore. Amundsen's pretty simple. It's the exact feature set that we needed. And then beyond that, it's less expensive. And being open source means that it's super customizable, and we can tweak it however we need, integrate it with anything, and contribute back to a community. So that was really how we felt about Amundsen. And so how did we actually implement it? We basically threw it on Kubernetes. So we have one pod for each service, and the whole thing's behind a VPN for security. And then we integrated this with some of our own stuff. So we have SSO with Okta. We built a custom Looker integration, which I'll talk about soon. And we also integrated it with Neo4j4, which is not yet supported by Amundsen. I'll talk about that as well. And finally, we ingest documentation from our database tables and from Looker once every day, just using Airflow. An important thing about the way we implemented Amundsen, which is, I think, a little bit different to the way that it's done, for example, at Lyft, is that for now, we're not letting people edit descriptions. And the reason for this is that we really wanted, at least at the beginning, for documentation to be version controlled and for the source code to be the single source of truth. And we really wanted Amundsen to help us to increase the quality of our documentation in code instead of becoming a competitor to it or an alternative to it. But what we think is that going forward, once we have filled out a lot of this documentation in code, where we expect the most rigorous documentation of like, this table contains blah, these columns are this, we probably will start to open up manual descriptions, allowing people to talk about like other aspects of the table that they've discovered. So I'm going to talk more about some of the challenges that we faced that I hinted at in that implementation diagram. One of them is pretty minor. We ran into some issues with the package requirements, and I think that really this was a good example where like we were able to like engage with the community and get things fixed pretty quickly. We found that the requirements.txt file had very strict pinnings for each of the versions, which made it difficult to integrate with an existing code base that used other libraries that required different versions of those same dependencies. So we were able to basically contribute upstream a change which unpin those dependencies and then just install Airflow easily along with the rest of our code. And the other thing was Neo4j4. Our infrastructure team decided that, we would be better off using Neo4j4 because backups are easier and it would give us the opportunity to switch to using Neo4j software as a service tools like Neo4j Aura. What we actually found is that Amundsen is very close to supporting Neo4j4, and we only had to make a few tiny tweaks. We're currently sitting on a fork with these tweaks, but we're really hoping to contribute this back upstream pretty soon. And now I'm going to talk about the fun stuff that we did to make Amundsen our own at Brex. And so I'll start with the Looker integration. And I'll start by talking about how we built it before I move on to how it looks. And the thing with Looker is this: unlike say a database or like some other products, Looker really has these two very distinct sources of truth. You have these LookML files, and the source of truth for those is primarily GitHub. And in these files, analysts define models and views, which essentially describe how this front end should connect to your database. Meanwhile, dashboards are defined inside the product, not as part of GitHub or in GitHub files. And these dashboards reference the models and views, and the primary way of accessing them is through the API. And so we looked at this and thought, well, how do we combine this? Do we just have one Amundsen integration, which clones the repository and hits the API and combines that info? We decided not to do that because in our case, and I think it might be specific to Brex, but this is something I'm still going to look into. We didn't want to give the Amundsen Airflow ETL pipeline direct access to just git clone the Looker repository, which we considered to be a little bit sensitive. So this is what we did. We basically have two separate parts of the integration software. The first takes these LookML files and actually just extracts a whole bunch of lineage data and puts it into S3. This happens during our CI/CD process. And then the Amundsen Airflow pipeline itself downloads that data from S3 and also gets the data from the Looker API, combines that, and that's what goes into Neo4j. And this aspect of the integration, the fact that it's really split into these two parts, where one of them is essentially unconnected to Amundsen, this part that puts the data into S3, is the reason that we've somewhat hesitated on open sourcing it, since it's quite unique to the way that we're doing our deploys, but we're really going to try because we'd love to contribute this back. And as for how it looks, well, this is a Looker dashboard sitting in Amundsen. We think it looks great. You can see the description comes from Looker. You can see which tables that dashboard queries. You can see the owner, the CEO owns this one. But analysts love this lineage stuff, but they love it even more in reverse. Being able to see which, for a given table, which dashboards depend on that table is so vital, because understanding if I change this table, what dashboards might break is just such a crucial tool at a larger company. The other thing that you can see on this page is that we built some custom taggers. This is pretty straightforward stuff, but we really enjoyed how easy it was to do this with Amundsen. We have this one tag on the left, which is like a documented or undocumented tag. For the undocumented tag, this allows us to just click on a tag and see all the tables that still need to be documented. And then the data space tag comes from our role-based access control system, which is essentially categorizing tables based on whether they are derivative data or whether they are source data. We intend to add a lot of more tags about this. We think it's really useful. And we also did a little bit of stuff to make this tagging process a bit easier. We have some PRs to Amundsen itself, and it'll be interesting to see where those go. Finally, one smaller thing I'll mention is we actually made significant changes to the Snowflake integration. And what we did is modify it so that one query can pull all of the metadata we need, all of the types of metadata that we need across multiple databases for many tables at once. So the single query can pull like all of the columns in addition to like the last update time, the documentation and table usage. That's something that we also might see if we can contribute back. And so I'll talk about what's next for Amundsen at Brex. I think that the biggest thing for us at this point is really to collect user feedback, statistics, so that we can drive adoption and also drive the creation of additional documentation. You don't want to build something and find that nobody's using it or getting value from it. So what we intend to do is really start using the logs that Amundsen produces and the statistics to figure out who's using this, who's getting value from it. We'll do some traditional surveying and talk to people. We want to make sure that people are really getting results from Amundsen. And the other is that we just want to start making more use of its PII tagging capability. We started there pretty simply with the categorization, but we're going to go much further down that road shortly. And finally, I think as I've hinted at a few times, we'd love to contribute even more upstream, especially after we get over this initial kind of implementation rush and hump, I suppose. We'd like to get to a place where we can take what we've done, distill it, and put it back. So that's pretty much it. But I'm sure you've got lots of questions. Thank you very much for your time. And yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Joe. Time for questions.
I have a question, Mark. Sorry. So I saw at some point you talked about how you use tagging to mark for things like documented, not documented. Are those like auto-generated, or do you allow users to edit those?
So these are auto-generated. In theory, we could allow users to edit them, but we've been really concentrating on auto-generating stuff. And you can actually see it as an example here, like this is the code for the categorization transformer, the one that says data space. It's actually just getting the data from another source and applying it to the table if the table is in the dictionary that it gets that data from. But yeah, that's all automatic right now.
Okay, because I was gonna suggest we also like just put up a new release with like the new use of badges and the difference between badges and tags, especially when you said you have some interest in moving into having, I guess, users have more editing capabilities in the future. Badges are meant to be like source of truth, like very small piece of information. So right now, like you can have a badge that is green, let's say at the table detail level, and say, oh, this is a trusted source of truth based on this badge. So that might be something you might want to look into with the new releases.
That's interesting. We'll definitely take a look at that. Thanks.
Yeah, the tag is designed for more like manual editing, while like the badge is for certify. So basically you could ingest from a source of truth and then through like ETL or API call. You could even have like column level badge. So for example, for your PII tagging, I assume you don't want like just in a core screen like table level, you want to do in a column level. That you could also leverage like the column level badge that Alison is mentioned. Yeah. So one question for me is like, for everything is on the Kubernetes in your deployments, like for the Neo4j, is it as well? Or you put in a stateful pod, or how do you deploy for the Neo4j stuff?
So in terms of the Neo4j stuff, I believe that it is on Kubernetes. I actually don't have a huge amount of context on like the details of that. I wonder if Let's see. Minsu is in this call as well. Do you want to answer any more of that?
We are using it as a pod, but we don't have any like a lot of work on like beyond just like regular persistent volumes, and because we're taking the approach of committing all the metadata back to source, so we can always rebuild like if for some reason like the pod crashes.
Thanks.
Hey guys, Dimi from Revolut here. Thank you very much for this presentation. I've got some questions which is maybe not related to Amundsen itself. How many tables do you have? How many analysts and data scientists do you have? So essentially, what's the ecosystem and what's the population of this ecosystem that you're working with?
So I'm actually, hi, this is Andrew from Brex. I'm actually running a query to get the number of tables right now just to get a ballpark, and it's taking some time. So I'll get back to you soon on that particular. In terms of data analysts and data scientists, we have, I think Yang can correct me, but about 20 plus data scientists / data analysts. And we also have various customers outside of the data organization who also interact with our tools as well too. So we'll have people from business and ops that also interact.
I think we have about, oh, sorry.
Oh, go for it, Joe.
I think we have at least 2,000 tables. And I remember
I think so too. I think
yeah, because that's how many undocumented tables we have. Something I remember.
So that's probably the right magnitude.
Yeah.
I have a question around the documentation. Joe, you mentioned that the documentation was happening in code. Could you walk us through what that flow looks like? How does the documentation in code get to Amundsen? As well as, do you expect these users who are using table to put these documentation in code, or are there different users who are putting documentation in the code?
Sure, I can walk you through some of that. So at a high level, what we have is ETL pipelines, like the ETL pipeline which puts the table into Snowflake. We basically made updates to have it also put the table documentation into Snowflake. And then Amundsen is getting that documentation from Snowflake, and that's how it populates. Going into a bit more detail, some examples of that are, we use, I don't know if you've heard of DBT. It's a, yeah, I guess for anyone who's not heard of it, it's just a piece of software that helps you write your SQL transforms, write your analyses as SQL transforms, and then put those as tables into your database. That provides YAML files, and you can put the documentation in as YAML files, which go into the database by default. So we make use of that. For some of our in-house ETL tooling, we just made some small updates so that, for example, you can provide documentation in the definition of your transform, and that will be added to Snowflake as well. So we made a few tweaks like that just to make sure all the docs end up in Snowflake.
Got it. And the assumption here is that the person creating the ETL job is the one who will put in this documentation.
That is correct. Yeah, whoever is defining the table would be the person that writes the documentation. We do still have some work to go when it comes to source tables, like tables which are defined in Postgres, for example, which are not necessarily part of our ETL pipelines. There we would like to be able to take the comments from, say, the Go or Elixir service and get those into Snowflake. That's actually another piece of work that I forgot to mention that we're doing as well.
Got it. Thank you.
Hey, Paulas here from Rapido. Just a quick question. How frequently you run the DAGs on Airflow? Because we also tried a similar POC with Metabase, just an alternative of Looker here. And what we found, like this pool-based approach, and we have like 2,000 plus dashboards, and then queries are there also. And yeah, we could not pull it like too frequently. At least one per hour we had to pull. So yeah.
So we're running it once per day.
Yeah.
And that seems to be working fine for us. I think it did help that we made those optimizations to the Snowflake integration. I think it would have taken a bit longer for each pull if we hadn't done that.
Okay. So do you have anything like which omits the dashboards which are not modified in last 24 hours? Or is it like blindly import every dashboard 24 hours?
I think right now it just re-ingests everything every 24 hours.
Okay. Okay. Ingest and overwrite. Okay. Cool.
All right, last call for questions.
I just had a comment. So Joe, you were saying that you wanted to get some more data from the users and yeah, get that feedback loop. And I just want to comment and also give kudos to Dorian because he has been working on something that we have a PR app, and hopefully we can merge soon. And the idea is that right now when we are tracking, so we are logging things, but also we have you have an option to install Google Analytics, but this Google Analytics implementation is not really well done in the sense that we load the script and that's it. Because the front-end application is a single-page application, it doesn't log the page views, but we are not using it to send events either. So it's just a little bit lacking. So what we are doing there is we are going to try to reuse the Redux actions that we send in our application to send metadata for analytics. And also the way that we approach it is that it's going to be a pluggable architecture where you can just choose the analytics providers that you want to add, and that could be multiple. And so we're going to grab all those events on the same way, and then we can send it to as many providers, analytics providers that you provide as plugins. So hopefully this is going to be ready soon. There's still some work to do in the sense of we have the infrastructure, but we still need to add the metadata on our actions and probably add more actions. But the idea is that we will provide for all Amundsen users a really good set of data from our users, for your users, so that you can just analyze it the way that you want.
Yeah, so actually, Amundsen, I'm not sure, Marcos, you have context. We already have action logging in the front end side, basically log every actions. Like we actually never we rely on Google Analytics. And the way it works is like we check every API call and see all the detail, and then we flood it into an event pipeline. So that's how like Leaf build the dashboard. I think the Google Analytics is more for like checking like the page speed and all those web events. But if you want to like just checking like user action, like what table they're using, what table they're searching, what dashboard, etc., and build like and join with your data warehouse, like the action logging will still recommend it, I would say.
Yeah, and the idea, my vision here is to actually make that action logger just another service, another plugin that you plug, so that we track all the stuff through the analytics, the Redux actions. And then you can plug whatever you want. So we have the action logger. We just keep that one as a default plugin. And then the users can add more plugins, more analytics providers, and then they can just use the stuff. Thing is that action logger, when you add the logic of this tracking into the front end, it always kind of adds complexity and adds dependencies to the front end that you need to just do in all the views, right? So you need to import the action loggers and the clicks and this, do that. And that's kind of extra work, and that shouldn't be. So with Redux actions, would you put it on a middleware, and then you forget about it. You just throw actions, you add meta on those actions, and it just kind of blends into the way that you work. Really
I guess we don't need to discuss here, but I write a tutorial. What I mean is not on the front end side, but we do on the front end Flask side. So not doing on the React side. So you will take a look at the tutorial, or also like we could sync with Tamika if you are not clear. So yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Well, thanks again, Joe, for presenting, and appreciate you sharing the context from Brex.
Thank you all for listening and the great questions.
All right, next up is the REA Group, and we're going to pass it on to them. And we have, we have Alex, Abhinay, and Stacy talking from REA.
Cool, sweet. I think we'll get rolling. I suppose if we just go to the next slide, Abby. As we are Australian, we think one of the first things we were always like, we were unsure of how to exactly pronounce it. So we know there's the American way, there's an Australian way, and there's also a whole bunch of other different countries that are on the call as well. We do have a Norwegian teammate at work, so that we actually got him to pronounce it so we could try and get a source of truth and all that sort of stuff. So we'll get the little video and we'll see. Hopefully the audio comes through. But let's have a look.
Amundsen.
So if that's settled the debate, we've had some Norwegian person actually go there, and that's how it is. But yeah, we'll get into actually introducing ourselves. But I thought, yeah, if we say it wrong, we've said Amundsen, there's all the different variations. But yeah, that's cool. So let's go to the next slide.
Yeah, cool. So what we'll walk through is actually really similar to Brex's walkthrough. So we'll talk about why we needed a data catalog and then why we ended up choosing Amundsen. We'll do an overview of what our implementation looks like. And then we got a lot of user feedback in our alpha testing. So we'll talk about that and the customizations we made on the back of it and what we're thinking about for next in our roadmap. So my name is Stacy and I'm the data manager. And just to give you some context about what REA is and what our data needs are, on the next slide I've got, we're Australia's largest property advertising portal. We're about 1,400 employees, 500 of which are developers. And when we were thinking about the data discovery problem, we really wanted to focus on the 50 or so analysts and data scientists that we have across the business, so they're all in different pockets. So thinking about those as our key stakeholders, on the next slide, I'll show you what our data, just kidding. This slide, I think everyone here is having the same problems with data discovery. So when we surveyed those users, about 20% of their time is spent just finding the data. And you can see they really don't like how hard it is to find analysis or other data sets. So on the next slide, Abby. If we're focusing really on those core data analysts and data scientists, we wanted to think about, in terms of a data catalog, the stack that they're most familiar with. So BigQuery is what we use as our enterprise data warehouse. And then we use Tableau Server as our BI and reporting. And then for batch processing, we've got an ETL as a service, which is built off of Airflow, and it lets our data scientists, sounds pretty similar to what you're doing, run their batch processing, but all of the abstraction, all of the Airflow configuration is simplified into a YAML file. When we were thinking about choosing Amundsen, we looked at some vendors and we also looked at open source, and we started to think about what our decisions were. So on the next slide. So I think all of the vendors really had the same connectivity to BigQuery and Tableau and Airflow. So most of our must-have features were already available in those. But the things we really liked about Amundsen, because again, it's open source, we've got the flexibility to customize and then build the features we needed rather than being dependent on a vendor's roadmap. And one thing that I really liked compared to a couple of the vendors is that it's not relying on a lot of manual curation. We don't have data stewards or formal role that does documentation. So anytime that you rely on manual documentation, it's going to get outdated quickly. And then your users lose trust in the tool. If you're using GCP or BigQuery, you might have looked into Google Data Catalog. And one big distinction between Amundsen and data catalog is that BigQuery or Google doesn't let you search for data that you don't have access to. And I really liked that about Amundsen, that you could search for things even if you didn't have access, so that you knew to request it. With the UI, that was another big selling point for me. I thought it was a really nice, clean, intuitive UI, and all of the user testing that we've done backs that up. And finally, we really liked, again, the opportunity to contribute back to an open source project through things like talking at these community meetings or through the PRs that we've raised. And just a few things that we weren't totally sure about when we started. So first, it's not a complete solution, right? So other vendors have things like business metrics glossary already integrated. So that was something that we knew we weren't getting, but we thought it was the right trade-off to make. And our team is a data platform team, so we're really strong with backend development, but we haven't had much front-end development, so we weren't sure how much that would slow us down. But that's ended up actually working pretty smoothly and being pretty easy. And we also didn't really have a good idea of how long the implementation might take. So speaking of implementation, I'll hand it over to Abby to talk about how we've done that.
Hey everyone, my name is Abby and I'm a data engineer within the data platform team at REA Group. So I'll take you through how we implemented Amundsen at REA and what the implementation looks like. So just to give some context, data platform team at REA basically manages and actively develops Breeze, which is basically a YAML-based abstraction over Airflow, and also does all the infrastructure around it, and in addition to other things. So Amundsen was basically our latest addition to our stack. So basically, we implemented Amundsen as a POC last year as a hackathon project, and we really liked it. And then, as Stacy told, after comparing more options, once we decided to go with Amundsen as the choice of our data catalog, we wanted to productionize this more like an MVP and get some quick alpha user feedback and then release it to a wider community once we had that feedback. And that's exactly what we did. So basically a pair spent around 4 weeks to get this running more like a productionized MVP. And then we went to our alpha users to get that important feedback. And once we had that very important feedback, then again, a pair spent around 4 weeks to make customization and release the MVP to the wider community. So what does the deployment stack of Amundsen and REA looks like? So basically, as you can see, there's the 3 common services, which is the front-end metadata and the search service, which are all deployed on AWS ECS. So we built our own Docker images and push it to our ECR registry, and then deploy those Docker images instead of using the Amundsen Docker images directly because there aren't official images. And as our backend, we are using Neo4j as our choice of metadata backend, which is deployed on EC2. I think the difference here would be currently we don't use a Raft cluster, but have more like an EFS block mounted to an EC2 instance. So what this means is in case the instance goes down or we do any version upgrades, let's say to 4, so it comes back with all the metadata and the data does not get lost. And it potentially saves us from any downtime that might occur due to metadata not being available. We also looked at having it backed up to S3 buckets, but we did not want to have the overhead of maintaining those scripts, and that's why I went down the path with EFS. And then the search service is basically use the AWS managed Elasticsearch for our Elasticsearch service. Then comes the metadata extraction layer. So the metadata extraction and ingestion is done in a very standard way. So we have an Airflow tag, which is deployed using Breeze, which is basically our internal ETL tool we have talked about. This tag basically runs daily, extracts data from certain projects in BigQuery and puts that into Neo4j and then indexes it to Elasticsearch. So we do not actually index dev or sandbox GCP projects in Amundsen. So we only index prod datasets. Also, another thing, I think it's very similar to what Joe talked about. So we don't consider Amundsen as our source of truth. So we do not allow people to edit information in Amundsen. So we still consider BigQuery as our source of truth, which comes from our source control. So everything comes from Breeze, which is a batch processing tool. So it allows you to provide descriptions, which comes from a source control and then puts it into BigQuery, and then the ETL indexer basically collects that from BigQuery and puts it into Amundsen. So we've put a thought about why we want to do it. There might be a good reason down the line we want to change it, but for now we did not want to have two islands of information. So that's why we went down that path. And then now we're planning to get more metadata specifically around tags, Breeze, and other data related to data lineage, data quality in the future, which Alex would talk about in the next few slides. So I'll hand it over to Alex, who will basically take you through what customizations we have done and what does the future of Amundsen at REA looks like. Over to you, Alex.
Let's go next slide. Yeah, so I think Amundsen is built to be like a company agnostic tool, and especially I think around data, there's different cultures, maturity levels, and different domains. And with like the core mission of like Amundsen, like expediting the process of finding, understanding, and trusting the data, small and incremental changes that we have done. It really aligns with that mission. So I think it's like we have done over 12. I'd probably like to preface it. It's like there's nothing. Like they are, I'd say, like surface level tweaks and stuff like that, really just to make it more applicable to our analysts and our data culture and our maturity levels and domains. They're the sorts of changes that we have made, and we'll go through that. Some of the changes that we do. But all of the changes that we did were based on the alpha user testing. So we had a whole bunch of different types of users that we had come through, and then just these are some of the common things that we thought like that we could fix that could make the experience just a little bit better. I probably would preface it as some of the changes that we have made, we're sometimes unsure if it's like REA specific stuff or it could be more generally applicable. So if you see any things that you think could be more generally applicable, we're more than happy to contribute them upstream. But we also know that, you know, sometimes the things that we've done are more to make it a little bit more specific for the REA users. So if we just go to the next slide, please. Cool. So I think one of the things that we thought about is like, how do we actually implement these customizations? Abby touched on a little bit earlier. So we built a custom Docker image. For two reasons. There's the security aspect. If it's not an official image kind of at REA, we really want to be sure of like both the application and the system code that is running on those images. And then also because how we actually go about doing it is patching the Docker image when we're building it. So yeah, when we're building the custom image, we'll have like a folder structure that mirrors mainline, and then we'll just patch over the specific images. The specific files that's there. So it's working now, but we do have, so we say like patching is cheap and it's quite easy to do, but we still haven't done like a version upgrade. So I know that 3.0 has just come out recently. How that will be and how annoying that will be with like going between the two could potentially change how we actually do the customizations in the future. I think when choosing to patch and not fork, we really wanted to be conscious that we were staying like in sync with mainline and not deviating it. And if there were changes that were generally applicable, we'd upstream them. So that's probably some of the reasons like why we did patching. I know there's the forking, which may actually be what we do in the future. But yeah, when we were coming out just down to the customization way, we were just interested in see how other people. So I thought we'd just share it. So if we just go to the next slide. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail. We'll pick about 3 of the changes that we did make, but this is just like a bit of like a summary of some of those front end changes that we did do. So that comes up to 12. They're small, but I think incrementally and you put them all together, they do make a bit of an uplift to the experience for our users. And that's some of the feedback that we have got. So just go to the next slide. So one of the changes that we would like to highlight is, so yeah, there's the frequent users one. So I've just highlighted in the box in red. So normally Amundsen would just have frequent users, and with I think it was getting quite polluted by having like service accounts in there as well. I know some people in the community just filter them out, but I think that metadata can actually be important, especially when we don't have a lot of like lineage data just yet. So it is kind of quite important to highlight that there are service accounts using these tables, because generally service accounts are linked to like production systems. So I think that is important for the data owners to understand who is using that in the various different types of ways. But yeah, if in that example, you can see that like I've redacted some of the stuff, but like the service account, like user or email that it was using, wasn't actually providing that much context. So that's when we thought we did want to separate that. We will be changing that to like a role set base. That makes it a little bit clearer of like what it is. But yeah, what we just did was just filter that out. So if it has the G service account slug in the thing, it just gets filtered out into the second one. So yeah, if this is more useful, like we can actually do that. And we found it just a little bit clearer so they can still find the domain experts, but also know like their service accounts using that as well. Cool. Next slide. Thank you. So this is where we made a few changes to the advanced that some of our users just got stuck a little bit, and so there's a few changes in this one. First of all, I think we're just changing the tooltip for us. The tooltips that we changed, the first one just didn't resonate. I think this is when I think we go back to like the different data cultures and who the people that are using that. And that's where we just updated the tooltip, because yeah, not everyone knew what a regex pattern was, but knowing some of those wildcard things really enables advanced search to be a little bit more powerful. So we do want our users to be able to use that. But a lot of the changes that we have done, and you'll see here, is just to make it a little bit more like use the BigQuery language, and it more aligns with what our analysts are kind of used to talking and how they talk about the types of data. So that's where we've changed like source to data set, table, column, just a bit of reordering, and then also removed stuff that we don't yet implement just yet, just so it's a bit cleaner. We really like the clean UI of Amundsen, and we just would like to keep it like that. And until we implement some of those like tagging, then yeah, that's when we'll probably bring that back. But yeah, it was really just to make it clear about data sets and tables, and just changing that so that it's quite clear to our users what it's actually doing, because that was a common thing that kind of they got stuck on. But yeah, with this one, these changes is quite easy to do because it's all just done through the front end config. So that was super quick just to get through as well. Cool. Next slide, please. Partition columns. So we partitioned a lot of our tables. But we found that on the right side on 2.3, the date range was showing the partition date range. So we, then again, it was a bit confusing for our users when they were going through user testing of like what that actually meant, because it wasn't actually the date range of the table, but of just the partition. And we also wanted to highlight to the users of like what was the actual partition column, especially when they're going through that, because it changes from time to time. We really just wanted to surface that to our users, just the other metadata. And it is a little bit more on that BigQuery side, but for us, where we've scoped this tool of what the assets are tagging for now, is that it is in BigQuery as well. So yeah, that if it's not a partition table, it just defaults to non-partition table, but that is one of the changes that we did make just for our users. Cool. So when we think about like what's next on the menu for Amundsen and what's coming through at REA, I think the next big rock that we'll be going through is authentication and authorization. So we can kind of know who they are and what they can do, and that really comes into play when we're doing like the preview features. That is like a bit of a workflow that we do see our users do in the BigQuery console, and if we are able to bring that through to Amundsen, I think that just helps understand the data a lot quicker. And then obviously we can also get the bookmarks in there as well. The other big thing, and I think you've heard us talk about a little bit before, is like surfacing Breeze metadata, which really falls under the umbrella of data lineage. So we're knowing, what input and output tables, transformation logic, all of that sort of stuff that provides a bit more high resolution image of what that data is like. So it ties into our broader metadata strategy. So it's really just how do we surface this data? So we've got a few ways that we'll be storing that. So that could either be in BigQuery, or it's like more of an event-driven kind of way, in terms of like we just every time on a deploy and also on a run, we start to record these ETL jobs so that we can then surface that. But yeah, when we're thinking about how do we actually bring that thing with the metadata builder, we'll also have to kind of think about how do we actually then get that across. Similar to like the Looker integration of just thinking like, how does that actually come across? But yeah, so they'll either be in a BigQuery table or be just on Kafka as well. So we could just pull that through. But there are our big things that we've got coming and like as a quite a high priority in our next one. And then in the next slide, I think everyone's got a backlog that's nice and long, that all the features they'd love to do, but with finite time. So things like enforcing table and field descriptions through Breeze. So when like a new ETL job is deployed, we can have that check. It's like, if we want that, we need to have that as a requirement if you want to get that run on Breeze as a part of the platform. Programmatic descriptions is an interesting one. Like we'll have common column names or that sort of stuff that we just want them to be written down once and they're quite consistent in how we refer to them. If we can do that programmatically and we don't have to worry about, you know, just looking at a document to get that thing and being able to generate those for them. So if it's like a, let's say REA UID and we have quite a agreed upon definition for that, how do we start to then surface that in the tool and help them do that? So that's a part of the other, some of the work. Some search results improvements, table level lineage. We also have to think about what do we want to get from tags and how does that work at REA, and a bit of a strategy. A bit of contention of like, where does this metric glossary sit at REA? Is it in the tools? Is it around the tool? But at the end of the day, they'll have to work together. So how does that work? Well, and then yeah, Tableau server. I know there is some dashboarding, Tableau dashboards integration on Amundsen. I think there's there's the Tableau API, and then there's also another service within Tableau that we just also then would have to then get that metadata out through. I think there's actually just a Postgres database but it's a little bit different to the current implementation from first look. And also, I think, yeah, Kafka is getting a lot of legs at REA as well. So I think also just like the same way that data asset that would be surfaced as a table, surfacing Kafka topics as well. So that's our backlog, not the highest priority, but I think those other two. But yeah, that's kind of the next state of play for Amundsen at REA. So yeah, that kind of wraps it up. So if you've got any questions or anything like that, I think one of us will easily be able to answer it. So hopefully, yeah. So if you've got any questions, happy to chat.
I have one, and I think Stacy was talking about being able to search through data which a user may not have access to. Have you built any workflow around searching for the data set that they don't have access to, and then them going to actually request access? Like, how does that happen today?
Yeah, so I guess right now we don't have a workflow is the short answer. So we'll probably try to figure out what that should look like. With bringing the owners in, I think that at least gives them a first place that they can go to kind of contact a Slack channel or something like that to ask for requests.
Got it. Thank you.
I think there was also just a message on the chat from Tao about yeah, using a key value store to actually service the descriptions for that. I think that's we'll be doing something similar to that. We've got basically a repo that manages a lot of those role sets and just also sort of like human readable kind of like tags for that as well. So I think there will be some translation that happens somewhere. It's probably in that metadata. Like the metadata ETL job, and I think that's probably what we'll do. The frequent users could also be changed once we get better lineage. So how we surface that in the tool could depend on, you know, how long those frequent service accounts are there.
I have a question. Could you talk a little bit more about the process of getting like those alpha users on board and like kind of how you collected feedback and you know what that all looked like?
Yeah, so I can answer that one. So we probably chose about 8 people, and I kind of purposely chose them because they were in different roles across the business at different tenures at REA and different lines of business. And I started harassing them just through a Slack channel to get me feedback, but then I was inspired by a talk, I think a few months ago, that someone had done user interviews. I'm also a data person and not a UX person, so which kind of faked my way through some through some UX research interviews. And that was really helpful to get that feedback, to sit down and watch someone actually go through. I think that was kind of the most eye-opening to decide what features we needed to change and what customizations we needed to do. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Yeah, it does. Although now I'm curious, I'll ask a follow-up in terms of like the sitting down and asking them to go through. So I guess you just like literally said, hey, go on this thing, and then like watch them over, I guess, Zoom, or maybe this was pre-pandemic, but I don't know.
No, yeah, this was just over Zoom. Yeah. So I kind of had a list of questions that I wanted to answer, and I can send those over or post them on the Git repo or something. I think next I should probably add in specific tasks that I wanted them to try to do. But I kind of, just had questions in my mind about how different parts would work and tried to guide them through. And I think the hardest part of those UX interviews was just trying to shut up and let them actually do the talking as opposed to me doing a lot of prompting.
Cool, that's really useful. Thank you.
And if you can get the team on those and engineers in there as well, like I think that's super important to kind of get that empathy for the users. But there's a whole bunch of things where you just like, you think's obvious, and then once you're sitting down with them and you aren't talking, you just like, oh, click the button inside, but until you actually see your users doing that, and you can get that through data, but it's also, once, if it's not all implemented for those analytics, you can get it quite quickly through the chat.
Cool. Last call for questions here. I'll say one more thing then. I noticed that y'all had put a partition column on the left-hand side, and I know Lyft has done some explorations where they were highlighting the partition column in the column list. And so the explorations we were doing at Lyft were around sorting the columns and putting the partition column up on the top and highlighting it in the column list instead of mentioning on the left. And I think both of those approaches may work, but something for y'all to consider.
And just to chime in a little bit, actually at iRobot, we did the same thing that Lyft did with that. We actually added some badging on the column in the column list to indicate that it was a partition key, and added a custom flag type so that you could mouse over that and it would actually define partition key for anyone who's not familiar with what it was.
Cool. Thanks, Christina.
Yeah, so right now, I think the latest UI could allow you to do different sorting, like the default sort, like what we had before, and then you could sort by usage as well as alphabetically. In the meantime, also could leverage the batch feature, like a listen is put together to surface like the column level batch, like partition columns, like primary key, etc.
Awesome, cool. Well, Stacy, Alex, Abby, thank you for waking up at 4 in the morning to chat with us. Really appreciate it. Cool. We have a few minutes. It's open forum for anyone that wants to bring up anything for this meeting or next meeting. These two. All right, in that case, thank you everybody for joining. We'll see you in a month. Stay healthy, stay safe.
Thanks.
Take care, bye.
Bye.